YouTube. I'm Chucky 2009. It's raining today, and also I'm here with my buddy Steven, and we're going to be doing some dual shield flux core welding.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to be doing some flat horizontal position. We'll do a little bit of vertical, some overhead, talk about machine setup. We're really lucky. Steven here is from the Georgia Trade School, and I understand this is something you guys teach.
Yeah, very extensively in all positions.
Yeah. So you've done it a little bit before then.
Yeah, I used to do pressure vessel work for a place called Trinity Rail, and so we welded pressure pipe up to 200 pounds with 1/16 flux, and it's dual shield, of course. So yeah, I've had a fair share of it.
That's excellent. Yeah. So really hope you guys like having Steven here on the channel, sharing his expertise here. So basically, dual shield, from what I know about this, it's a pretty high intensity welding process. It's very commonly used on large things like railroad cars, for instance, structural steel, large industrial weldments, agricultural equipment, big, heavy stuff that requires a lot of metal to be put down very quickly. Would you agree with that overall?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we got that, and also I think you're saying this is a little different than just like running your regular, single shield flux core with turning on the gas. This is, I think you probably agree, this is a totally different animal here.
Yes, completely different. Not as much spatter as single shield. Doesn't run as hot as single shield. Not as dirty as single shield. So the benefit of having the gas is it's much more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah,
so.
And it's maybe a little more operator friendly.
Absolutely.
Most of the self-shielded wires that I've at least seen generally run on electrode negative. So this is electrode positive, like you'd run a 7018 on, like you'd run short circuit MIG on. And we're using some 75-25 gas. Do you think that'll work out okay for us?
Yeah, so you're going to have a lot of old school guys say 100% CO2 on everything structural. You're even going to have guys that say 100% CO2 on everything MIG. 100% CO2 has its place, but 75-25 is that even balance of penetration and a nice aesthetic looking weld. So, I favor 75-25 always, but then, 100% carbon dioxide has its place. But.
So what kind of flow rate are we going to be pushing through this with the dual shield here? I know I'm told it's a little higher than with MIG.
Yeah, typically I run about 35 to 40. I mean, have I run a flow rate of 25 or on the lower end 20? Yeah, but something like this, that diffuser and that nozzle that's pushing that gas out, once you get over 45, you're going to blow that gas away. So around 30 to 40, I would say.
All right, so to paraphrase, decently sized MIG machine with a decent duty cycle, electrode positive, 75-25 gas at about a flow rate of 35-40-ish to get started. And I think we're ready to go. So we're going to start off welding some half-inch plate with this. So again, it's a fairly serious process. And anything else you have to add here?
No, not really.
All right, cool. I'm really excited to see this, so let's do it. Cool.
All right, so a couple things to note when you're running, whether it's flat, vertical, or overhead, or horizontal. You want to pay attention to what the puddle's doing and what the wire's doing. If it's taking you a really long time to build that puddle up, even if it's just 035 flux core, what we're running right now, which typical flux is 045. If it's taking you a really long time to build that puddle up, you might want to turn your volts up, burn the wire off a little faster. If it's punching against the plate, and it just seems like it's not grounding right, that's usually your volts. If the wire is burning off too far towards the nozzle and kind of dripping, you want to turn that wire speed up, which is going to bring that wire out faster. And I know that's a lot and that can be overwhelming, but essentially what I'm saying is, just like on any of Chucky's videos he talks about, just pay attention to what you're doing. You don't just have your amperage like with stick. You've got wire feed speed and you've got voltage. So you need to pay attention to those, and we're going to go into those later in the video about what it looks like and what a good weld looks like with wire and what a bad weld looks like with wire. All right, so let's talk about this real quick. So if you'll notice, we can get a close-up of these welds real quick. You'll notice the real difference between the first weld and the second weld. Okay, so what I've got in the background here is a completely fused weld, right? Penetrated both toes into the top and the bottom of the fillet joint. And then what I've got here is a weld that isn't necessarily have bad shielding, but it has bad settings. So this weld was completely shielded from the nitrogen in the atmosphere, but what happened is the voltage is so low that it can't burn that wire off enough. You still have your pressure from the wire feed speed, but you don't have that burning element that the voltage gives you, and that's why this weld is laying on top of the plate. And to be honest with you, you put welds like that on structural steel, you know, it's only a matter of time until those things break and whatever you've worked on becomes completely unfused. So that's what it looks like when your volts are really, really low. Again, it doesn't burn the wire off fast enough, and it will not penetrate into your weld. So now we're going to show you what it looks like if your volts are correct, but your wire feed speed is too low. Now, this is what happens when your weld doesn't have the appropriate amount of wire feed speed. Now, if you'll notice, I know it's kind of difficult to see, but we have this weld in the background. That's our appropriate size weld, around 3/16 of an inch. Okay. Then we have a weld with too low a voltage. Now we have a weld here with the correct amount of voltage, but too low of wire speed. So I know you can't see this, and hopefully we'll get an action shot of this later in the video, is the wire globs up, and I don't know if the camera can get that ball on the end. What happens is your wire isn't coming out fast enough. So this wire is rated with the gas flow and the correct settings. It's rated to burn off around the same amount of distance from the plate that the wire is thick. So you want this wire burning off at 35 thousandths of an inch away from the plate. Now what happened was, you couldn't see it when I was welding, but the wire is not burning off till almost close up to the tip. Now that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. Not necessarily safety dangerous, but efficiency dangerous in the sense that it'll damage your tip. You'll have to stop, you'll have to undo everything. Hopefully it won't bird's nest. You'll have to replace your tip. Also, if you notice, the amount of time it took me to travel from the beginning of my weld to the end of the weld, and the actual weld size is, that's also not good from an efficiency standpoint. So you want to be able to travel fast, penetrate fast, and get cooking, because that's what this welding was created. This is a wire form of a 70-18 stick electrode, essentially. You want to be able to put surfacing welds in, put structural welds in at a high deposition rate, and you don't want it to take a long time. So again, what you see here is the product of my weld is about the size of a 1/8 60 or a 1/8 70-18 weld, and it took me about the exact same time about that. So you just don't want it to take that long. So just to recap, we have low voltage here and correct wire feed speed, which the low voltage allows our weld to not penetrate into the base metal, and which causes lack of fusion. And then we have correct voltage and a low wire feed speed, which takes a much longer weld, takes more time, and it can damage your tip and also the other components that are inside the nozzle and the diffuser. You have two different types of porosity. You have actual porosity in the weld, which is caused by, a number of different things. Dirty material, your flow rate's not set correctly on your flow meter, incorrect shielding gas, and things of that nature. Then you have what's called surface porosity, which a lot of times can happen from your diffuser is on the fritz, your gun angle, your flow rate is too high. So there's two sides of the spectrum as far as porosity is concerned. You want to pay attention to what you're doing with your nozzle. So for instance, everybody knows that the diffuser on a standard wire feed gun, the way that the diffuser comes out, and I can't take it off right now, but if you can imagine, there's a piece of equipment down in here that allows the gas to come out at 35 psi, and then this nozzle, what it does is it allows the gas to come out in a conical shape. And so what that's doing is it's coming down over your weld and shielding that weld from the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So if you take that gun and you pull it away too far, or there's a big gust of wind, you're not going to shield that metal anymore. Similarly, if you take that nozzle and you've got it in a really tight spot and you're just a little too far away, it's going to do the same thing. Or if your flow rate is too high and you bury the nozzle too close to the metal, you can blow that gas away. So there's a couple things that can cause wagon tracks, wormholes. Those are all surface porosity things that can be tweaked just by paying attention to what you're doing, looking at your machine and your equipment, and diagnosing that. And then as far as actual structural porosity goes, that usually has a lot to do if you are completely on the end side of a tank and you're running out of gas, or your metal is just extremely filthy. And we're not talking about rusty. I'm talking about it's got concrete, it's got dirt, it's got mold. I mean, I'm talking you're not able to actually get to the metal and really start that arc smoothly. And then a couple other things I wanted to talk about is your gun angle. So you're going to hear a lot of guys tell you push, pull, drag, up, down, whatever, it doesn't matter. And in some cases, you're not going to have the choice whether you can push or pull. You're just going to have to do what you can do. But I will tell you that the best way to run Flux is at a slight 15-degree drag. So if you'll see, as I run, I'm always kind of dragging and pushing with my fingers. This is not pushing, this is dragging. Pushing is when you take the gun and the puddle is jumping in front of your arc. That's pushing the weld. So that's what you don't want to do. You do not want to push the weld. You want to drag the weld and have the puddle be behind the arc. So what happens is if you push the weld, sometimes if you push it, not all the time, you can trap slag. So if you're pushing the weld and that puddle is jumping in front of your arc, what's happening is that puddle's spurting over, and then your arc's coming over it after that puddle is hardened, and that's how you trap slag. So just to recap, you always want to drag, keep the puddle behind you and the arc in front. When you push and change your gun angle, just that opposite 15 degrees, that puddle's going to jump in front of your arc, harden, and you can now bring that molten metal over an area that already has flux in it, trap slag. And everybody knows trap slag is a recipe for a cracked weld or a lack of fusion, and you know, you're not going to pass an x-ray test, you're not going to pass a structural test that way. So
all right, yeah, that's excellent, thanks for that. I know one thing that a lot of people who are newer to dual shield might deal with are the wagon tracks or the surface porosity. If somebody's got that going on, what would you recommend they change or they adjust?
So typically if my students have surface porosity, wagon tracks, wormholes, things like that, the first thing I'll do is I'll look at their flow rate, I'll check the gas out, I'll check to see if their voltage and their wire feed settings are correct. But more or less it's usually just an adjustment in gun angle, it's just an adjustment in checking your gas or an adjustment in checking your voltage. So those three variables really can cut that down. Also too, the biggest one that I run into for novice welders is really their stick out is just too far away. Okay. So they're just getting a little bit of porosity from the shielding gas not completely covering it.
So can you talk a little bit about the voltage causing the wagon tracks in there? Do you turn the voltage up or down if someone's having an issue like this?
Yeah, so if somebody's volts aren't burning the wire off fast enough, you know, you've got to think for flux core, there's a flux inside of the core of this wire. So as Chucky said, the volts affecting that is you got to think about it is if your volts are low, you're not burning that wire off all the way, and that flux is not being able to get distributed evenly. Similarly, just like the gas. But specifically to the voltage is if you don't burn that wire off hot enough, you're not going to get the full shielding properties from the flux that's inside the wire. So if I've got surface porosity and I've checked all of my settings except for the volts, if I've checked the flow meter, my stick out, my gun angle, what I'll do is I'll crank that heat up on the volts and I'll have that wire get burned off really hot, and 9 times out of 10 that fixes the problem right there.
Excellent. So all right, well yeah, thanks for that. You want to show us how to do this properly now?
Yes sir.
All right, thank you. All right, so I understand we got a horizontal position fillet weld set up here. Can you maybe show us exactly how you're going to position yourself in the gun to do this?
Yeah, so I'm just going to put my left arm up here because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to hold the gun with my right hand. But if you're left-handed, it's going to be the reverse. You're going to prop your elbow up and you're going to hold the gun with your left hand, which is your dominant hand. And what I'm going to look for is I'm just going to look for a straight in and then tilt to about 15 degrees. Again, I'm gonna go straight in, let my wire be directly in the joint, and then I'm gonna roll my nozzle and lift it up off the plate. Make sure that I can travel the whole distance of the joint and pretty much look for a weld that's gonna go about 3/16 of an inch up on the top plate and 3/16 of an inch out to have a 3/16 overall fillet weld. So again, the appropriate angle and wire electrode placement, I'll stick that out a little bit, is you want the wire directly in the joint. So not on top, oops, not on bottom, you want it directly in the middle of the joint right there. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll weld it up high and it'll roll over, or they'll weld it too low and it won't roll up. So straight in, roll my nozzle a little bit directly in the joint, and then travel at a nice rate all the way throughout. All right, so a couple things I want to talk about as I chip the slag off. Now again, I'm focusing on my settings. If my settings are correct, I shouldn't really have to beat the slag off of there. So I'm going to take my chipping hammer and the broadside, and I'm going to scrape my BBs off. And everybody here knows that when you go and weld test or interview for a place, you know, presentation is everything. So after you chip your slag off, you know, wire wheel, clean everything up, wire brush. You know, obviously you want to take the time to get all those BBs off. I'm not too worried about it right now. What we're looking for here on this weld is I'm looking for complete fusion on the top and the bottom side. And if I had a flashlight, I'd show you that there's one spot where I went a little too slow, and you can see right here. It's still fused correctly and it's still fused perfectly. What you're looking for here as we shine this flashlight is you're looking for complete fusion on the top and on the bottom, a nice even weld. Yeah, can finish the whole joint. I could have gone a little more there and went back into my puddle and got a crater there, but essentially in the weld affected area you want to look for complete fusion on the top and on the bottom. And I'm going to show you how to put your next pass if you were to put 3 passes in this joint. The next pass that I'm going to do, if this broadhead represents my wire electrode, just like how my first one went into the center of the joint, I'm going to put my next one right at the toe, and then my third one is going to go right at the top of this toe. It's going to give even dispersion, put one in the center, one in the bottom, one at the top. So I'll show you guys how I do that right quick.
All right, that sounds awesome. So you're saying if someone wants to fill this whole thing out with weld metal, it's pretty much just the same stacking routine as what we're doing with the 3-pass weld here. Would you agree with that, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. Chip my slag on my second weld, kind of same thing again, wire brush, clean it up, wire brush, clean it up, and I'm going to look again for nice even penetration. Now I'm ready to stack my third weld on the top to complete the weldment of this joint. All right, so now that I've put my 3 passes in on this 1F fillet joint, again, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for an even distribution of these welds, you know, and obviously there's, you know, minor defects in it, but overall we're not looking for pretty, we're looking for efficient and aesthetically pleasing. So don't get hung up on what it looks like as long as it's serving its purpose. So as I take this file, I'll point these things out to you. I'm looking that when I'm finished, the center of my 2 welds line up with what would look like the center of this joint. So my first weld goes directly down the center, and then my second one ties into the toe of that weld, and then the third one ties into the toe of that same weld on the top. I know that can all be confusing, but hopefully from the video you can see how first one goes in the center, second one on the bottom, third one on top, and you would just continue to repeat that process with the exception of the initial first pass. So if I were to make this another 3 passes, I would put my first weld here, then I would stack it here, then I would stack another one here, and then I would come back to the bottom and so forth. And obviously the more and more welds you put in, the larger the step count, you know, up to 5 and 6 and 7 welds. But this is essentially what you're looking for a standard weldment of a 1/2 inch piece of steel on flux core.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so hey, thanks for showing us that.
All right, so today we are going to run a typical welding test that's very common. It is a 3G flux core arc welding test. We got a 30 degree bevel on some 1/2 inch plate with a 1/4 inch backing. I'm going to show you how to fit these up. We're going to space them apart about 1/4 of an inch. We're going to run a root in there, fill it with stringers, and 3 or 4 stringer cap it.
Nice. Do you have any advice for someone who's perhaps never run or is perhaps a little rusty at running dual shield flux core in the vertical up position? Because I remember learning this, it seemed to be quite a challenge for me.
Yeah, I would say practice on a scrap piece of metal. I think that's the best way. Maybe get yourself a piece of angle iron, anything to emulate a groove, V-groove.
Okay.
But gun angle is everything. Settings on the machine are everything.
All right.
You don't want to run too high voltage and just enough wire speed. So just pay attention to your settings, and we'll get into gun angle and stick out and stuff like that later on in the video.
All right, that sounds good. Is there any advice you'd give to someone who just can't keep the puddle actually like in the joint and has it running out and everything?
As far as visual aids, I'd probably say just tie into your stringers well. Maybe go down a shade. A lot of times with flux core, it's really, really bright. So either go up a shade, go down a shade, whatever you can do to see the puddle better. Get yourself in a position where you can see the puddle, so you're looking straight on as opposed to the side.
All right,
So
let's see how you do it.
all right, so what we're gonna do here is, since we've already got these edges clean, the goal here is to have all of the pieces that your weld that's gonna tie into to be clean. No mill scale, no paint, no rust, no dirt, nothing like that, because the goal here is to be certified and pass a bend test, and anything you're gonna put between yourself and that layer of clean metal is gonna be cause for a crack, a tear, a break, anything like that. So I'm just gonna grind a little bit on the surface up here, grind this backing strap down. All right, so we have officially ground down the mill scale off where the area where the weld is going to be affected or tie in. So as you can see here, grab a rod. We're gonna run a stringer root right down there in the center. This is a 1/4 inch gap. And the goal here is to tie in this plate and this plate to the backing strap. You want complete joint penetration here, complete fusion. So we've removed the mill scale on the top as well, where that cap is going to tie in. All right, so once you get your gap set, you know, keep an eye on it throughout, but we're just going to put a tack here at the bottom on both of these pieces. So keep pressure with your hand. You're more than welcome to lay a bar across it and put a vice grip, but more than likely you don't have a vice grip large enough to get to the center of the plate, so a hand will do just fine. And let's turn the machine on. So we just want to put 2 small tacks at the bottom, just in case our gap gets wonky or out of place. We're going to look down the bevel, make sure that everything is nice and tight still. And then if everything's good to go, what we'll do is we'll flip it around now and we'll do the other side. So you can see here, I don't know if I mentioned this, I take welpers, just common tools in the shop, to keep pressure even all throughout, because if you don't, if you have really large plates, what happens is they'll kind of lay down and create a gap between the plate and the backing strap, and you can see we've got some give in that plate. That's where that pressure comes in. So we're going to put our hands there again, just put small tacks on it. You want to inspect, make sure that your gap is consistent all the way throughout. And the next step, grab yourself a pair of vice grips right on the center of the plate. Not super tight, but just enough to take the slack out of there. And then you're going to run 1-inch welds on both sides of the middle and then the corners. We've got an even tacks, 3/4 of an inch, you know, just as long as it's a little over 1/2 an inch. Double check our gap. Everything's clean. Everything is positioned evenly, 1/4 inch all the way throughout, and we are ready to weld this up. All right, so the purpose of this pass, you want to make a weld large enough that it's going to tie these two plates into the backing strap like I've said before. This is about the stick out you want, maybe a little more. You definitely don't want your nozzle touching the plate at any point for two reasons. Number one, it's going to screw up your weld when you go to cap. You're going to dig into the weld pool and that can obviously make the weld be rejected. And you also don't want to block your line of sight. If you're too close, you can't see the puddle. So pull back, and the actual wire angle, you want about 15 degrees of a push, right? You want to push that weld uphill. Now what you don't want to do is start straight in, and then as your hands get wonky, end up doing this number. You want to maintain the same gun angle all the way through to ensure the consistency in the weld. So we're going to put this root in real quick. Two things to remember, like I said, don't be too close. Have your stick out maybe an inch to half of an inch away from the plate, and your gun angle to be slightly straight in or slightly up 15 degrees. I'm going to tie this wire, or that weld, right into that toe. Tie it in right there. And then when I come to the right side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tie in right to that toe. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and run this stringer all the way up and let you see what it looks like. Alright, so we've got our two welds in here. Alright, we've got our left weld tied into the toe and our right weld tied into the toe. We have not come over the edges yet, which is the goal. We do not want to come over the edges before the cap. So we want to generally flush weld. What I mean by that is it doesn't have a bunch of humps or highs and lows in there throughout. So it's generally flush across the plate. So we're going to put a couple more layers in here. Maybe one here, a second one here, and a third one here, and we should be ready to cap. What I do want to say, before you put the cap in, you want to be flush across the gap, but not over the edge. You're going to use the edge as a visual aid to tie your stringers in, just like you're using the toes of the previous welds as a visual aid to tie in your following welds.
You need those bevel edges, guys. Don't eat them up until you're absolutely done.
Yep, that is key. That is key to a good cap. All right, so we have officially put our first pass in before our second pass before we cap. So I want to point out the bevel edge, right? I've just put another pass in, but I have still maintained my crisp bevel edge. Again, that's our visual aid to cap. So now I'm going to put a pass in on this side, bring it back to flush because I have a recess here on this side. I'm going to bring it back to flush on this side, but I am not going to come outside that edge. And then we'll be ready to put our 3-stringer cap on the edge, the middle, and the edge. So we have officially put our final pass in before the cap. Something to note, we still have our bevel edge on both sides for a visual aid. So we are going to go edge, eclipse the edge, cover up the middle, and eclipse the far edge. Maintain the same stick out, maintain the same gun angle. Nothing changes for the cap. The only thing different is you want to split the edge of that weld and cover it up with the actual weld itself. So you don't want to come out too far though. In other words, you don't want to place an entire weld outside the bevel that's going to be all the way over here. You just want the puddle to spill over just enough, about a 1/16 of an inch. Then the middle weld, the only thing you want to worry about is height. You don't want to be off the plate 1/8 of an inch. And then the same thing goes with the edge weld on the other side for the other cap weld. You just want to come right outside the edge. So again, Our parameters are 1/16 of an inch outside and no higher than 1/8. If you've run everything flush up until this point, it should be relatively easy.
For those who are wondering, this is 45,000 dual shield flux core wire running 255 inches a minute at 22 volts.
Can you pull back that nozzle, Lenny? Yeah, good. Now we can see. Awesome, thanks.
We have officially put our cap on. Couple things to note. We are barely outside the edge of the bevel, just enough to cover it up.
Yeah, you just like consume that bevel edge. Basically no more than necessary to do that.
Yeah, right. You don't want to put an excessive amount of weld on there. You want to show your instructor or the company that you're training for that you can use the optimal amount of materials, nothing more, nothing less. You know, if you anybody can put a big honking wide high cap on there, but in order to be a good welder, you want to use your materials to the best of your ability. So we're just outside the edges of that bevel, and we are not over 1/8 of an inch. We have a tight grouping. Our welds are tied in correctly with an even overlap, no low spots, no high spots. Like I always say, consistency is everything. Consistency is key. So hopefully this video helped, and look forward for some more.
Hey, this looks great. Thank you so much for showing us. Everybody, thank Mr. Stephen Leone. And Stephen, what are we going to be doing today?
All right, we're going to run a typical 1/2 inch 30-degree bevel on a 1/4 inch gap with a 1/4 inch backing strap overhead flux core test.
This is basically a certification type test. I don't know if it's an AWS thing or just something you do at your school that a lot of students who are going to be getting into structural welding applications will need to become proficient at.
Yeah, so it is a D11, it is AWS cert.
Okay.
So that is good, the upside of it. So it is a certification through the AWS. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to take these plates and we're going to space them on this backing strap about 1/4 of an inch, about like that. But before we do that, we're going to remove all the mill scale.
So if I'm not mistaken, you're just trying to remove, since we are practicing for a certification test, we should make it so things are as perfect as possible by removing anything that's a barrier between the metal, the base metal, and our weld.
Yeah, you want to take all the mill scale off, all the dirt, all the rust, any water, any type of deposit, spray paint, anything. You want it all to be nice, clean, and shiny so that your weld has the optimal amount of fusion to the bevels, to the backing strap, so that when it goes under a bend test or any type of stress test, it is going to be tied in and it will be sound.
But I heard that flux core is stick welding from a spool and you can stick weld through anything.
Well, of course you can stick weld through anything, but for the sake of a certification, you want to clean it up so that it's going to pass.
We want to do it as
tears.
perfect, everything as perfectly as possible.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Depending on which way you're welding this, doesn't really matter. What matters is the angle of your wire. So you want to stay straight up in as possible. Okay, if you angle too much in any direction, you're going to shoot flux BBs everywhere. You don't want to trap them in your puddle. So straight up and down, do not push the weld either. You always want to have a slight drag or straight up and down. All right, so we have put our root pass in. We have fused both sides of the bevel into the backing. Settings are everything. If that wire's popping and bouncing back on you, you want to turn the volts up. If the wire's burning off too fast, you want to turn the wire speed up. But everything is positioned, so don't just turn one up and turn one down just willy-nilly. Pay attention to your settings. You want it to burn in nice and flat, not be convex and have any slag on the side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tie into the toes of the welds here on the edges. So we're gonna tie in on the toe over there and then tie in on the toe on the left-hand side. And we'll show you what that looks like in just a minute.
All right, just for reference, it appears that we're using 275 inches a minute and 23 volts of 45 thousandths E71T, I believe, wire.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Yeah, let's see how you do it.
All right, so we have our 2 passes in there now. Trying to maintain flushness, generally speaking. Now we're gonna start stacking on the sides here and in the middle again, or sorry, on both sides. We'll try to keep it relatively tight to 2 welds throughout until the cap, and then we're gonna do 3 stringers on the cap. All right, so we put our 2 more side passes in. Now you see we have a low spot in the middle. In this instance, what I recommend is running 1 pass down the middle. So we'll do that now, and then we'll be ready for the cap. If you cap it too low and you have a low spot in the middle, then you'll just have to run another pass over that. So either way, if you cap it and it's low, you can run a pass over it where it's low, or you can do it now, so that way your cap is just consistent. So we're gonna run 1 more pass here in the middle to bring it up to a flush, and then we're gonna cap it. All right, so Chuck made a very interesting observation as I was cooking underneath this. You'll notice I was wearing a red leather, or a red cloth jacket, and he said, hey, do you want some leathers? And I was like, absolutely. So, overhead flux, really anything overhead, but especially overhead flux, you wanna go ahead and throw some leathers on, some high collared stuff, protect yourself. The last thing you wanna do while you're certifying is be in the middle of a weld and feel your shoulder on fire and have to push on through that. So leathers really help you with all of that. Let's go ahead and take a look at where we're at right now. So we are officially ready to cap. So we just ran that pass down the middle. Now we are back up to flush, and we just barely have those edges. You see the edges there? And those are our visual aids, so that way when we go to put our cap in, as we know from the previous videos, we're gonna go edge, middle, edge. We're gonna cover the edge up, we're gonna cover the middle up, we're gonna cover the edge up. We're not gonna come out more than a 1/16 of an inch, and we don't wanna be off the plate more than 1/8 of an inch. So if you guys can manage to do that, if your school offers it, then you have passed a flux core test visually.
Dude, that's slag.
To be done, they get in there.
Ah, I'm gonna steal your moment of glory. Oh!
Deal with it! Deal with it!
Dude, that looks great. Wow, dude, for overhead, that's incredibly smooth.
Yeah, I'll try.
You have any tips for that other than just try to stabilize yourself as best as possible?
Yeah, I mean, machine settings. Machine settings, have the volts turn high enough to where that wire is really, really burning off and not popping on you. Stick out, you don't want to be too close, but you want to be just far enough away where you can see the puddle. Rod angle's everything, man, straight up and in. I know some people tell you to angle it away, that's fine. But straight up and in will help that puddle burn off really evenly. So you see we've eclipsed our edges, we've tied in our welds, we've finished the bevel out. We're not over 1/8 and we're not outside over a 1/16. So that is the crash course on overhead flux core.
Beautiful. Thanks for watching, guys. Links in the video description. Big thank you to instructor Stephen Leone for showing us how it's done.